Welcome to the Power of Music podcast, brought to you by JM International. Get ready to explore conversations with those making a difference through music.
Hello, and welcome to the Power of Music podcast, brought to you by JMI, Jeunesse Musicales International, the network of NGOs that empowers young people through music across all boundaries. In this episode, we're joined by Ruth, a multi-award-winning cultural producer, social entrepreneur, and CEO of In Place of War. With a mission to harness the power of creativity for positive change, Ruth's work spans over 25 years, connecting communities in conflict zones and regions affected by climate change through the transformative power of arts and music. Through her leadership, In Place of War has become a global movement, empowering local changemakers to build resilience and drive innovation in some of the world's most challenging environments. Our conversation touches on the importance of music as a cultural asset, even in the most dire circumstances. Ruth shares her insights on whether people continue to create music when bombs are dropping, how to confront and navigate imposter syndrome, and the value of keeping an open mind. Through her experiences, we explore how music can inspire hope, resilience, and action. As always, if you enjoy our content, don't forget to subscribe, like, and rate the podcast. We hope you enjoy the episode. Thank you so much for joining us today. First, can you share a little bit about your journey into music and In Place of War?
For sure. Yeah. So I started out as a musician when I was 10 years old. My dad bought me an electric guitar, and quite reluctantly, I wasn't ever planning to be a musician, and I learned to play and then formed a band and spent the next 10 years kind of being in that band with my sister and a friend. And we, our whole life and our whole world and our whole community was doing gigs all over the north of England. And I then played in some other bands, which was really nice to give me some other experiences. And then kind of got a bit disillusioned with the music industry. Everything was in London and we were in the north of England, and it felt far away, and it felt unfair that everything happened in this one place, that we had to keep going down to London. And I felt like, wouldn't it be nice to have a record label in the north that represented artists from the north of England? So I started a record label when I was 20 that represented music in the north. And the ambition was to be proud of having a northern identity and a northern musical kind of heritage. And then start from running a record label, I noticed that as the music industry changed to digital, that there seemed to be this kind of breakdown of kind of major labels, and this breakdown of kind of understanding how to harness digital technology. And that actually opened things up to a larger number of independent and grassroots artists to be able to do things for themselves in a way they'd not been able to before, but they needed to rely on a record label. They could now self-release and do things themselves. So then I started an alternative music industry event called Unconvention, which was all around bringing people together at the independent sector to share ideas, to collaborate together, and to, I guess, in some way focus on music as a cultural asset rather than as a commercial commodity. And that was really, really key to the foundation of this movement festival. I don't know what we'd call it, but it started in Salford in the UK, and it went all over the world. We took it to as far as Australia, Colombia, Brazil, Germany. And through these events, two things happened. One of them is I understood that actually people really wanted to kind of build community and to learn by doing. So we created something called Unconvention Factory, which was all about creating a space where people could come and record, produce and release an album in a day and be part of that entire process. And it was amazing. 1,000 people in an old industrial building coming out with the music that they'd been part of recording, with the artwork that they'd designed. It was this really amazing process. And we took that around the world. But the other thing is I started to see more and more music as a mechanism to have social impact and to change people's lives, whether it be people on having brought up in a working class, community in the UK, giving them, meaning and hope and connection, to people in gangs in Colombia who were using music to get themselves away from those gangs and give themselves identity. And that's really what took me to then be part of In Place of War, which is an organization that works with music, art, and creativity as a mechanism to make change around the world. And it's all about working with amazing local people in some of the most challenging contexts, the context of war, conflict, gang war, places affected by climate change, places affected by social injustice. And it's all about helping to provide platforms, resources, capacity, tools to give people the option to make the change that they want to see in the world using music and creativity.
I didn't know about this unconvention in the unconvention factory. How was the reception from the artist side, being able to participate in something? What does this mean for the artist?
Well, it was kind of amazing for anyone that participated. So we had, for example, artists, they would come and they would record their music in front of a room of people who would be doing the tech for the first time, people who would be involved in the whole of the process. And it was about demystifying a process so that the artists could see they could actually record, then you can, all the steps they needed to take to be able to then release their music at the end. But it wasn't just the artists, it was people who were sort of working on the margins of the music industry, who were really also from the independent sector, who were really benefiting from this process. And then members of the public who were like, I want to be involved in music, but it's always felt far away for me. And now you had all these people in a room together who were building a new network and a new infrastructure. And that felt really powerful because before, the kind of gatekeepers of all of that were generally based in big cities. So if you're based in a rural part of the UK, how do you access that? And also it was very much a network of, we would say like an old boys network, a network that's felt there was a glass ceiling there if you were not from that network of people. So this really smashed all of that apart. And I think it kind of gave people an opportunity to have some power and have some creative kind of, an outlet for their creativity, but also a mechanism whereby they could reach much bigger audiences by harnessing kind of digital tools, etc. So it felt really powerful. And from the very first event that we did, some of the bands that were involved in that are some of the biggest bands in the world right now. So I think, you can really see that was a kind of turning point for artists just generally. And it was about providing a platform. And the reason that event came about is because we actually went to the biggest traditional music event in the city of Manchester. We said, we've got this idea. We want to talk about how we can do things differently. And that event said to us, no one's interested in that. So we just thought, okay, fine, we'll just do it. And we made this event and we did a 3-day event and it totally sold out. And we had people coming from different countries to come to it. It was like, oh, wow, this worked. This is interesting. There's an appetite for this. And of course, not everybody always wants to do the stuff that's focused on the making of money and the commercial, what I think we're seeing more and more is, people wanting to make music to have an impact. And for me, that's really interesting because what I see is a change in the music industry now. So you have these big companies, but all the big companies that we work with my organization, some of the biggest music companies in the world, all want to give something back. They all want to support the grassroots now. They all want to do stuff that's actually interesting rather than just working with these super big artists where actually it all feels very vacuous, I guess.
Do you have an idea what fueled that change? Is that something of the zeitgeist or what is that?
I think the 80s and 90s and early 2000s music industry was ridiculous. And I think, people are still talking about the music industry failing them today. And there's some big conversations about that at the moment. But that idea of it being so male dominated, it being so this idea of rock and roll, which really wasn't supporting anybody, this idea of the gatekeepers. And if you weren't part of that club, then you couldn't be part of it, meant that the music industry was missing a lot. And I think that a lot of those people fell out of the music industry and sort of as young people came in. And I think that's what I'm seeing now is this kind of new people with a different outlook about what music should be. And that it isn't, even if you work for the biggest music companies in the world, I see this with I have a global music industry advisory board. We have like 27 of the biggest music companies in the world. And what I see is what drives each person that sits on that board is the work that we do about how can we make change in a really remote community in Peru, or, how can we build infrastructure, where there isn't any, and actually that's where exciting things are possible, So I think it's about young people coming in and also a sort of a general, I think there's been a general move towards we can't keep going and just focusing on making money. There has to be more to it than that. We're in music. Surely there must be more to it than that.
Well, it's called the Power of Music podcast. Can you look back at the years running in place of war? What is a memory that stands out?
Wow. I've been involved in the organization for 20 years. So for me, I started when I was really young. Oh, there are so many amazing things, being involved and seeing the impact of music to make change in revolutionary settings. I don't know, I could maybe talk about seeing music being made in Palestine on a checkpoint, opposite a checkpoint, where this band called Sa'alik were making hip hop in a place that you walk outside and there's one of the biggest checkpoints. This is in Kalandia near Ramallah, one of the biggest checkpoints. They're in there making hip hop, expressing how they feel. And they said when we were there, their friends had been murdered, and this is what gave them hope to have this space. They had one day they were in their space and they went to leave and the door had been cemented shut and they couldn't leave, and all of these kind of situations. And to be in there and to understand how, like the question, do people make art when bombs are dropping? The answer is yes. That's the power of music, and to experience that and sort of what that means, how important it is, how important music is, that even though around you there are guns and there are bombs and there's violence and there's horror, that actually to be able to make music in that context is what keeps you going. I think that's powerful for me. So that's a standout moment. I think the other one for me would be very, very similar, but in a completely different context, which is going to Medellin in Colombia, which is where I went. That's really where everything changed for me. I was invited there about 20 years ago when it was considered to be the most dangerous city in the world. And I was invited to Comuna 13, which was definitely the most dangerous kind of comuna, the neighborhood in the world at that point. And I went there and I was very young, so I had absolutely no worries. And I went in and I saw these lads who were making hip hop, and it was incredible and it was so powerful. And even though my Spanish is limited, you could feel what they were saying, like you could really feel it. And then it was one of the guys that said, hip hop saved his life. And everyone kept saying that to me, hip hop is saving my life. And there were these huge communities of hip hop in the neighborhoods around Medellin. And it was really that choice. Like, if you're going to be in a gang, if you want to get out of a gang, you start your own hip hop crew gang. And that felt like actually music is so powerful that it can help save people's lives and help give people other options. That's huge. So yeah, they were I think they're two moments that had significant impact in what I thought music can do.
Is this a coincidence that it's both hip hop, or is that a common theme?
It's a common theme. I think there's a couple of common themes for me. One is hip hop, and this happened. And I think, hip hop started in the US. And I think that the guys in Colombia said, we took that, we saw what it did for like people of color in the US, for African Americans. And we wanted to think it could do something for us. Then you go to Zimbabwe and it's the same. And, and it's that kind of, hip hop is good because it's easy to make. You don't need anything really. You can just rap on a street, you can battle. So it's kind of very, very transferable. It's mobile. And the other kind of music form is electronic music. I find that this idea of the dance floor, as Laurent Garnier said, the dance floor is a political space. And I think that that's really, really significant in that dance music has brought so many people together. And those people coming together is powerful just in itself. The people coming together have then a greater power with their connection through music to then talk and exchange and become friends, and then have power to then have a galvanized group of people who can make change. So for me, it's those kind of music forms are really powerful in the world that I've experienced. Of course, there's many more, but I think, but I think for me, those are two that I see a lot in a lot of places.
And looking back at those 20 years, what are some common challenges that you face, and maybe also how have you solved them?
Yeah, I think, well, one of the things that you've potentially asked me not to talk about, but I will do, is funding, but I've got a solution, I think, around it. Everybody talks about funding being a challenge. And I think, for me, the way in which we've been able to sustain what we do is, I think, two things. One of them is about that idea of kind of do it yourself, do it together. We started everything we do on our own. We don't come from a big famous charity name or a big established global NGO. We started with just ourselves, just making what we could and doing what we could. And I think the key to that is doing things that are creative, that are relevant, that are engaging. I think those are the kind of clear the things that have got us far. And also to use what we have around us to make things happen. In the beginning, it was like we have nothing. So how do we do stuff? So we learned off the people we were connected with around the world. You hustle, you borrow, you collaborate. So the second thing for me is about this idea of do it together. So like working with others helps to amplify the impact of what you can do. Being one person on your own is terrifying. Being 10 is okay, we've got a little group. Being 1,000 is huge. So it's kind of how do you build this? And it's that idea of Brazil is very important in this idea to me, the idea of collectives and collective power. And actually from us working together, we can achieve so much more, where we're sort of, we want to bring change. You can't do that on your own. And then in terms of funding, I think there's something about like diversifying income streams. So thinking about if you can't get funding from your traditional grants and, the traditional ways, how do you get funding from other mechanisms? We formed a global music industry advisory board. As I said before, we've got 20 odd of the biggest music companies in the world sitting on that. And we bring everyone together and they provide us, the idea is just for them to hear what we're doing, but they'll always offer the solutions we need, whether it's funding, connections, etc. They're there as a kind of resource, and that helps us kind of do what we need to do. So funding is definitely one of the challenges. I think one of the internal challenges for me is knowing that you're having the impact that is right in the world. And I think it comes coupled with this idea of imposter syndrome. I was never any years old when I thought I'd be doing what I do now. And now I have people calling me. I consult on issues of sensitivity of people, programming things, culture from different places of conflicts. I have become this kind of in this position with knowledge and experience. And I think the most important thing is for me that I find a challenge is knowing the work you're doing is impactful and you can justify your position in that. And I think for me, it's a tricky one because the conflict in the world is getting more and more. The need of what we do is more and more. The funding is less and less. And so how do you ensure that you're still having impact? And I think there's part of that's an imposter syndrome. And then the other part of me goes, well, at least you're doing something, So I think that's sometimes an internal struggle with everything. And I think that's it. And I think also the final challenge is when you're building relationships and you're doing work, for me, I have to acknowledge my position as a white woman of a certain age and a certain class from a certain place, doing work in other places and other parts of the world, particularly with Indigenous communities, people of colour, people from different positions than me. And so how do you make sure that that's genuine and you're not being exploitative or you're not being a white saviour? And I think they're really critical things to consider always. And also because I come from a country that colonised the world, that's also something that's really critical to think about constantly, that I'm not colonising or I'm not trying to, it's very difficult. It's really difficult to kind of figure that out. And I think it's always been important for me from a very, very early age. My dad said to me, what do you want to do with your life? And he said there's this guy in Manchester called Tony Wilson, and he runs a record label called Factory Records. And he said, you can either make money, make history, or make art. And I decided in that moment when my dad said that to me that I wanted to make change because the world is a mess. But on the path and journey of doing that, it comes with questions, I think is key. So knowing your own self and you in not thinking that you are the same as other people because you're not. that's important to acknowledge when you do the work, I think.
And for people listening that recognize, for example, let's start with the imposter syndrome, because it's something that I hear a lot, especially young people starting projects and all of a sudden being in a position where they feel, oops, is this where we're heading right now? I agree that knowing why you're doing it, which is also why every training we give at JMI, we always start with Find Your Why for young musicians, for young cultural leaders.
Exactly.
Are there any other tips or things you've done to overcome that?
Yes. So purpose is really important in that. But the other thing is having a support network around you. So when you're feeling the imposter creeping in, that you can speak to people about it. One of the things I found particularly useful is having a mentor, really, no matter how old you are, having a mentor that you can just kind of like, when you're feeling like that, you can talk to, or a coach can be quite important. Or forming your own little network of people who are doing similar things. I think that's sharing. You know, I made a little group of people in the music and organizations in the music industry who are doing similar work to what we do in different parts of the world. And we meet every so often with no agenda. We just have a chat. And if you're feeling the imposter syndrome, when you have the chats with other people, you kind of go, oh, what, you feel this too? Oh, wow, but you're doing amazing work. And then you realize, oh, we're all doing good work, you know? So I think having a support network is really critical.
I agree. And I think also for let's say the white savior complex, that we are very prone to fooling ourselves and thinking we're doing something. And I think it's good to ask other people like, hey, I have this plan. This is how I want to do it. Please give me some feedback. Or like, let's talk about it. Let's dive into it and go to the core of it and where it comes from.
Yeah, no, completely. I think that's it. I think it's good to think about these things quite deeply. And I think sometimes you feel having conversations about your past and your history and where you come from, you know, I think is really important. But also it's not enough, really. You know, I think you have to have that purpose at the core of why you want to do what you want to do, why it's important to you, to be really transparent about things. And I think also everything's so nuanced, it's complicated. So as long as you're keeping asking questions and you're working in a way that I think colonialism was not about, it was not about a collaborative approach to anything. It was not about a sitting down and listening and understanding. It was a very, very different thing. So I think as long as you acknowledge where that came from and that you want to be the opposite to that, you know, that, and also to understand that about building trust, I think is really key. Been doing quite a lot of work recently with Indigenous people, and I met an Indigenous woman on a recent project, and I did my first call with her, and she went, I'm just going to let you know that I don't particularly like you. This was when we started the conversation, and I definitely don't trust you. And I said, okay, well, that's fine. Let's just have a chat and see where we go. And now we're working together. But, you know, like, I get that. Maybe some people would be like, well, that's really rude, or, you know, but it isn't really, given the scope of what's happened in the world in the past. And I think, you know, in order to make the world a better place, one of the things we need to do is sometimes remove ourselves where we've got the privilege, we've had the opportunity to give that to others who haven't, because the world can only be a better place. I mean, it's a mess because of people have not been included in that conversation in the past. So for me, it's about making room and space and lifting people up and giving, you know, and sometimes actually saying, I think I've found myself doing this more and more recently, where it's kind of like you get a lot of opportunities offered to you and then you give them to people who do not look like you. And I think that's really key.
In my sort of research for this interview, I also saw that initially In Place of War started as a research project for the University of Manchester, and correct me if I'm wrong here. How has that played a role in its sort of inception, and why the research route, so to speak?
So In Place of War started as an academic research project, which looked at the question, do people make art when bombs are dropping? And it was focused particularly on theatre. And we did a bunch of research with a number of case studies all over the world and produced kind of some traditional academic publications and papers and so on. And I think, you know, that piece of work was really critical in informing everything that we've done ever since. And it's that idea that, yes, people are making art, but what that art means in different times of conflict and by people who are in a place of conflict right now to where they might be when that conflict is over, etc., changes dramatically, and the purpose of art changes dramatically. But what also was interesting was the networks of people that we met during that research, and that actually there were questions that were asked. Can you help with this? Can you support with this? Can you connect us with this? And I think rather than just being that traditional research project that dips in and dips out, the beauty of what In Place of War ended up doing accidentally, in a sense, was maintaining the connections with everybody that we were working with. And some of the people that we work with now, 20 years later, are from that initial research project. I think particularly someone like Abdel Fattah in Palestine or Hope Azida in Rwanda, very much keeping those connections going. And I think there was this desire for people in that, who are, again, thinking about the imposter syndrome question. There are people who are manifesting amazing change in really complicated situations, but very much on their own. And there was this desire for people to connect with others in similar situations. So the next part of work after the research project was to form networks where we mobilized people and they could meet and understand other situations of conflict and how other people were kind of working in those situations with arts and culture as a tool to make change. And so that was the beginning. And I think, we were funded by something called the Arts and Humanities Research Council in the UK. They actually started, it was their first year when they funded us. So we're the longest, in terms of impact, I think the longest of any research project, I think, in history. I don't know, I might have made that up, but I think so. So, but what I think I'm trying to say is that for me, research is about research and impact. And I think, research, again, can be quite often delivered by people who are from certain backgrounds and from certain places. I think the beauty of this is that it has amazing impact still today in the world, and the learnings and the kind of things that we discovered in the initial research really influence why that's happened.
So do you think it sounds very useful to start with research, but is it also something that you advise? And I'm also asking, there's a little bit of a hidden agenda, because I do sometimes feel that the projects are started just because someone thought it was a really good idea. And I'm like, was there really thought into the sort of deeper levels of analysis of why this might work or not?
Yeah, so I have massive questions about research institutions, research funding, process I've been very, very involved in research, bid writing and so on. And I have massive questions about it. I think it's very, very problematic. I think that, a lot of ideas are developed by, like I say, people who are from certain backgrounds and certain places. And that really does then influence the way in which that research is conducted. But often I think when you're thinking, I'm going to do some research in a place, how much do you know about that place? Are you the right person to conduct that research? Do you know the nuances of what it is to be part of those communities? I remember seeing an academic once talk about how he'd gone somewhere and he'd extracted information and interviews and he never returned. It was really upsetting to me to think you went to this place, you spoke to these people, you took their knowledge, you took their ideas, and you never went back. That feels for me really difficult and challenging. So I think there's something for me about, ethical research. There's this idea that you're not allowed to pay somebody who does an interview with you in a research context, but then you're taking their knowledge, you're using that and you're getting paid. So I think there's some really, and that's like one of about 1,000 questions that I've got about research. But I do feel like research is a really valuable thing when it's done right. And I think, always thinking about there's kind of your traditional academic research, and then there's evaluating and understanding the programs and projects that you run as an organization like ours. And I think understanding your impact and understanding that what you're doing is effective is important, because you can learn from that and you can get it better every time. And I think we're all on a journey here. We're all trying to change the world, and there's in our own little ways, and there's no blueprint for that. So I think, it's okay to make mistakes, but definitely understand what they are and learn from them. And then, try and get what you're doing to a point of being the best it can be.
So let's reflect on that journey ahead. Where is In Place of War in 5 years? What is the vision?
So the vision is so at the moment we've kind of expanded out the work we're doing from starting in places of conflicts, and we now work in places affected by climate change and social injustice. So our work right now is everywhere from Greenland to the Congo to the UK and everywhere in between. Our programs are very, very much focused on young people. And to that end, we have a youth advisory board advising everything in place of war that we do. That's very global. We have a climate advisory board, a global music industry advisory board. So we have these groups of people who are designing and shaping the strategy of what we do. And where do we want to be? Well, we've got some really big projects that we're working on that we hope will, for example, a project called Earth Sonic, which uses music to tell the story of climate change and engage people in positive action. That's a really big project, and we hope that it will have a massive impact across the world, and that people will consider their place on this planet as custodians of the planet in this really critical moment in terms of climate. We've got projects around alternative, creative education, 100 Agents of Change, which is all about giving young people the tools and networks to be able to make the change they want to in their own communities. So for me, it's just continuing with that. 5 years is a very long time. You know, we do have a strategy, but everything tends to change with the world. And I think that's the beauty of being a small organisation like ours. I think we're big enough now. You know, we're small. We're bigger than we were, but we're tiny. And I'm very happy with us being tiny. It means we're more flexible and we can respond. We can be more responsive, and we're forever resourceful. So yeah, I hope we get to continue doing what we're doing. We live in very uncertain times, and we have some very, very scary things happening in terms of geopolitics, etc. So for us, it's just about continuing to, like he said, what is the why? Well, the why is that we want to continue to make change, and we'll do whatever we can do to do that, I guess.
If people want to find out more about the programs that you're running or about the organization as a whole, or even want to connect with you directly, where can they find you?
Sure. So it's www.inplaceofwar.net, and I'm just Ruth at inplaceofwar.net. Feel free to reach out. We're always looking for people to work with. You know, if young people are interested in finding out more, please reach out.
As always, the very last question. What is the power of music?
Such a big question. I think just music has a capacity like no other to be able to make change in the world. And I think that as a Palestinian artist said to me, without music, without art, what's the point in living? It gives us something that is very human, that is completely human. Without it, what are we? So music has the power to make us human.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. Thank you very much for listening. If you want more information about JM, or you would like to get involved, visit www.jmi.net. At JMI, we are on a mission to make the world more musical. That's why we created Mubazar, a digital platform that helps us manage all our musical activities across 80 countries worldwide, connecting musicians with opportunities to grow both personally and professionally. If you are a music professional looking for a better way to manage and promote your music activities, check out Mubazar. Created for music organizers, by music organizers, Mubazar allows you to run music competitions, workshops, camps, auditions, masterclasses, awards, events, and much more. Mubazar offers custom application forms, payments for your activities, jury tools, translations, analytics, and more. Mubazar is fast becoming the best place for musicians to find and apply for music opportunities online, and you can sign up today for a free organizer account by going to www.mubazar.com, registering, and then requesting to upgrade to an organizer on the right-hand menu. For more info, don't hesitate to get in touch via support@mubazar.com. It would mean a lot to us if you could give us 1 minute of your time and rate and review the podcast. In case you have any suggestions or would like to be one of our next guests, feel free to reach out to us through the JMI socials.